Welcome to Beg to Differ, the Bulwark's weekly roundtable discussion featuring civil conversation across the political spectrum from center left to center right. I'm Mona Charen of the Ethics and Public Policy Center, and I'm joined by our regulars, Bill Galston of the Brookings Institution and the Wall Street Journal, Linda Chavez of the Niskanen Center, and Damon Linker of The Week. There's a certain feeling today. We are recording this on Thursday, August 27th, about midday, and we have not yet heard the president's acceptance speech at tonight's version of the virtual convention, but there have been a number of events in the last few days that have given things a very worrying edge, and one of those was the shooting of Jacob Blake in Kenosha, Wisconsin. So I'd like to begin with Bill to analyze first of all, the facts of this situation are not yet fully known. And one of the things that I'm critical of, there's a lot to be critical of course. You know, the speed with which misinformation flies around the web is really frightening. And we'll get to another example of that in a second. But what is very frustrating is that there have been all these stories about what happened to Blake, and yet the police have not really provided much information at all.
Well, that's correct. And so people are reacting on the basis of the fragments of what has appeared in the public record, plus, of course, their priors.
Mm-hmm.
But the events are not waiting for a fuller disclosure of the factual narrative of what occurred. That's extremely unfortunate. First of all, we know that Mr. Blake himself was shot 7 times and probably left paralyzed. And we also know that a young man took it on himself to
Well,
carry a
let's wait
rifle.
on. Yeah, we're going to get to that in a minute. But
Fair enough.
yeah,
Fair
sticking
enough.
now with
So,
just with the
so
Blake
I'm
story.
look. I'm not. I'm not sure what to say at this point with limited availability of facts, except that there is a pre-existing template into which the different people from different points of view will slot their opinions and reactions, and we're seeing that in full force. I'm extremely reluctant at this point to come out strongly in one direction or another, uh, because I don't think that I'm in possession of the relevant facts. I will say this: I find it difficult to avoid the overall impression that police are more likely to resort to deadly force than they should be, and that they have not been trained in any way to back off, or to slow down, or to try to cool things down, uh, or to react with restraint when they're confronted with what the sociologists call oppositional behavior. We know that relations between the police and African American communities across the country are tense and fraught. Police know, or ought to know, that these confrontations are not likely to go smoothly. That the person that they're trying to uh, apprehend may very well not respond to an initial set of commands, and uh, and they ought to be trained to respond with a series of steps leading up to the use of force as a last resort. And I'm saying this as someone who believes in the necessity of policing. I do not believe that any society can do without it. Uh, I'm an agnostic on whether communities around the country are over policed or not. I'm afraid that some of them are badly and unfairly policed, but that's a different matter.
And some are
But
under policed.
and some are under policed, but uh, in case after case, my impression is that there were alternatives to the resort of deadly force that were either not seriously employed or not employed at all. And I think this goes back to the way policemen are trained. And if we want better policing, then we're going to have to go back to the fundamental assumptions with which police are sent from their training out into the streets.
Linda, I'm sympathetic to Bill's point of view, but you do hear critiques where people say, "Look, the it's so hard to draw conclusions based on a few seconds of video that gets circulated on social media. You don't know what led up to it, and so on and so forth." And some people are saying that if this had been a white man, there wouldn't have been an outcry about it, and that police, of course, shoot more white people than black people in general, although, that's a very, very fraught subject. Um, but but to bolster Bill's point, when you look at the number of police killings in the United States and compare it to other countries, I mean, we are just off the charts. In 2019, for example, there were something like 1,099 civilians who were killed by the police in the United States. In Canada, which of course does have a much smaller population, but in any case, the number was 36. In Japan, which has about half our population, it was 2. Now,
Right.
So that does kind of bolster Bill's point. And is it partly that we are a nation of gun fetishists, and we just have so many guns in circulation that the police are in a state of constant terror for their own lives? What do you think?
Well, I wrote a piece about this back when the George Floyd killing took place, and it obviously wasn't death by gun, but I wrote about the out of control police. And I think, those of us who do support the police, who do believe that police have an important function, that they have a difficult job, I don't think it is made better by the kind of policing tactics we've seen, especially since 2001. And I think there's been a move towards heavier weapons, towards tanks, towards police acting more like an occupying army sometimes than like community policemen and women. And I think that is a problem. I also think that the most important thing that Bill said, and I'd like to echo it here, is that we do not know yet all that took place in that confrontation. We do know, indisputably, that a man was shot multiple times in the back. And I do not believe that there is any excuse for the police doing that. Obviously, if your back is turned, even if, it's later shown that he was reaching for a weapon. I mean, there's been some talk about whether or not there was a knife in his car. You don't shoot somebody 7 times in the back. And so they aren't well trained. But what has happened is we have become so tribal in our ways of interpreting information that half of the country sees an incident like this one way, and the other half sees an entirely different and opposite way. And this is unhealthy. And the worst part is that your Bill is right. We haven't heard anything from the authorities. We have no one who's coming out even and suggesting that there's more information to be had. And so we're all left, to take a look at Twitter and to react because of, a few seconds of video, and to react, based on what preconceptions we bring to what it is we're viewing. And that is very, very bad, particularly in this highly charged political atmosphere.
Damon, I like Linda, I and Bill, I sort of, you see somebody shot 7 times in the back and you think, for heaven's sake, first of all, it didn't seem necessary to shoot him at all. But okay, I am second guessing the police officers here. I confess to that. And I'm not an expert in firearms, but I have heard people say that it's ridiculous to count the number of shots because once you start shooting, the adrenaline is pumping and you can't really control yourself. Do you have any insight into this?
Well, not really. I'm not at all an expert in kind of criminal justice issues or policing. I mean, I will say, as a human being and a male and someone who can imagine being in the place of a police officer in current circumstances, I can imagine the pressures in the moment are enormous. I mean, I'm not excusing anything because, like all the rest of you, I don't know what happened. And unlike with the Floyd video, where we at least had the context of the several minutes on the video, seeing this poor man's life snuffed out, in this case, we have no idea what preceded it. And
well, we do have a few other facts. There were outstanding warrants for his arrest for third-degree sexual assault and for trespass. And the reason the police were there is because his, I guess, ex-girlfriend had called saying that he was there, wouldn't leave, and had taken her keys and wouldn't give them back.
Sure, but, those don't sound like the kinds of things that one would expect would lead to
a
shot in the back.
No, exactly.
I mean, the escalation from one to the other is enormous. And
right.
But I do, at the same time, I do think that my mind does go to, all right, you're a police officer. You've been living through now several months of protests, denunciations, all the way from major politicians to local officials around the country, chants against the police, calls to defund the police. And there is a kind of looming sense of kind of danger on the streets with violent crime acts going up in a lot of places. And then you're in this situation where if something goes slightly wrong, the temptation to kind of leap to an almost paranoid response and overreact is probably pretty great. But this all speaks to the bigger problems that Bill first put on the table, and all of us have been elaborating, that there seems to be a problem in police training. The fact that the things that would keep a human interaction like this from escalating so badly is not functioning correctly, both as a function probably of training and kind of psychological acuity on the part of the police officer to judge how to react and de-escalate, but also the incredible number of weapons, guns that are out there on the street. I mean, one reason why cops in this country shoot so many more people is that the people they're confronting, the criminals, are themselves very heavily armed,
right.
or they have every reason to presume they might be, because there's like one gun for every American out there in circulation, and so it's a bad combination of causes coming from every direction.
So into this very, very sensitive and fraught environment of, heightened tensions over the Floyd and other deaths, Breonna Taylor and so forth, plus the pandemic, plus a presidential race that many people regard as existentially important. We also had a shout out on social media for armed vigilantes, basically, to come to Kenosha and defend life and property, as they claimed they were doing. Well, one young man, this is Bill was about to talk about this, Kyle Rittenhouse, 17 years old, arrives with a big gun, and there's video of him chatting with. I haven't seen it, but I've heard there's video of him chatting with police officers and the police thanking him and others like him for coming out. And later on that evening, he shot and killed 2 people and wounded wounded a third. So since, Bill, I cut you off when you first mentioned this, if you want to return to that topic, please do.
Well, just very briefly, it is clear to me from the accounts that I've read that the Kenosha police force was overwhelmed very quickly. They had never anticipated events of this sort, and they found themselves outmanned in a matter of hours. My understanding is that the mayor of Kenosha then requested the deployment of substantial number of National Guard troops. The request went to the governor. The governor responded initially with a deployment of 250. I think the request was something like 1,500. And that was manifestly inadequate. If the National Guard had been deployed in force earlier, it is possible that the space the vigilantes filled would not have been opened. So that's one of the variables here, that when things are spinning out of control, it's sort of Law and Order 101, that you respond with enough force to be seen as a credible deterrent. And that if you try to apply the force incrementally, you're going to come up with bad results. So that's part of what happened in this case. But obviously, the ability of social media to round up not just the good guys for worthy purposes, but the bad guys for the reverse, is in full evidence. And here we are.
Yeah. Linda, this young man, Kyle Rittenhouse, who's been arrested, apparently is very fond of guns, very pro-police, according to his Facebook posts, and was in the front row at a Trump rally in January.
Yes, but I think we have to be very careful here. The New York Times has a very interesting piece on the front page of their online edition today, which is called "Tracking the Suspect Accused of Killings at Protests." And they went through video and film footage, and what they discovered was that, yes, this young man should not have been there. He absolutely should not have been there. He absolutely should not have had an AR-15 type rifle at his disposal. And
is he old enough to be carrying? No, I didn't think so.
But the first person that he shot after another firearm, not next to him, but fairly close by, went off. You can see the flare in the camera footage, and as someone was coming towards him. So then he fled, and he fell down after he fled, and he was being chased by people who were screaming, there's the shooter, and he had already killed one person. And they began to descend on him while he was on the ground, and he then shot two more people, killing one and injuring another in his arm. The person he injured, apparently the footage shows, was carrying a handgun at the time. And now it wasn't pointed at him, it doesn't look like. But all of that is to say, again, this is a very confusing situation. And Bill is absolutely right. What we do not need on our street are vigilantes. And unfortunately, this administration and many on the right are encouraging people to bear arms. I mean, we'll talk about it later, I'm sure, but having the McCloskeys on this week during the convention, people with their AR-15s and their 357 Magnums. And I say this, by the way, as a gun owner. I own guns. I've shot guns. And I will tell you that, this idea that you are going to keep pulling the trigger. I mean, if anybody who's ever shot a gun knows, unless you're talking about an automatic, and the police don't have those, and most people don't have access to them, you have to pull that trigger. And it is not something that's done easily, at least not in this woman's hands. So it's just terrible that we have heavily armed people taking to the streets, and that there are protesters who are not, just protesting. They are there to do violence and mayhem. And the country is descending into chaos, and we are seeing it before our very eyes.
Yeah, that is what is very, very scary. Let me just add one other thing that we didn't mention, but this is a piece of just this terrible welter of confusion and misinformation that is out there and leads to terrible things. So in Minneapolis, which had quieted down, there was a Black man committed suicide in public on Wednesday afternoon. But there was quickly the rumor spread on social media that the police had shot him. And so there were riots and terrible destruction. And even though the police quickly issued a surveillance video of the man actually shooting himself, it was not effective. The riots went on, and Damon, of course, there are political implications of this. I thought that Joe Biden put out a very good statement on Twitter that hit all the right notes, but this is most people perceive, many observers think this is quite a vulnerability for the Democratic Party in general.
Yeah, well, I certainly agree. It is. And one reason why is because the right has decided that they are going to benefit the worse things get. And when you get into a dynamic like that in politics, things get very dangerous very quickly. As a kind of side note to this, I wanted to add on the broader discussion of the kind of the problem that happened in Kenosha with Rittenhouse coming in with his own gun. Back in late May, when right after the Floyd killing, when we had this large, protests around the country, some of which were more like riots, in Philadelphia, where I live, in an area of the city called Fishtown, which is kind of a gentrifying area that used to be more kind of white working class. After the first night or two of riots, you started to see vigilante, very kind of jacked up, muscular guys walking around with guns and baseball bats. And the police in Philadelphia were caught like slapping them on the back, shaking their hands, giving them like bear hugs. It was like they had called in for backup from freelance vigilantes. And one NPR reporter had his cell phone and was out filming some of this. And one of these baseball wielding guys came over and beat the crap out of them with the baseball bat. And then he took like a selfie of his bloody face after this happened. And that was, a few months ago. And it sounds like the Rittenhouse situation is a similar thing. And what you also had last night is then, which I think is far worse than anything we've talked about so far, is Tucker Carlson with his 4 million nightly viewers on his Fox News show cheering on the vigilante, saying, of course he came to help when the government won't put down the thugs and the anarchists. Ordinary citizens are going to go in there. What else did you expect? Treating him like a hero. Now, that will boost his ratings, keep up his fat salary at Fox News, and also maybe tip the country into greater chaos, which could only help his preferred candidate in the race for president. So it's a bad situation, and the right is certainly not contributing in a healthy way. You do not want a civil society where the cops are kind of teaming up with freelance vigilantes wielding guns and baseball bats. That's not going to end well.
May I drop an historical footnote to this, Mona?
Yeah, absolutely.
A few weeks ago, a very interesting book came out called Hard Hat Riot by David Paul Kuhn. And it talked about a confrontation between anti-war protesters and white working class, mostly
Construction workers, yeah.
union guys, who in effect formed vigilante groups to go after the anti-war protesters, frequently with baseball bats. And you saw exactly the same pattern of police standing by and then congratulating uh, the the hard hats after they'd beaten students within inches of their lives. So this, this idea uh, is nothing new, unfortunately. And the police, I would have thought, are prepared to be neutral enforcers of the law. That's what they're supposed to be doing. Uh, and it gets to be very dangerous when the police take one side of an argument in politics or civil society. It's exactly what they should not be doing.
Right. Well, this brings us very smoothly into a discussion of the Republican National Convention because, arguably, Linda, the theme is that in Joe Biden's America, you are not safe. Those are the words of the sitting vice president.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I've never had a root canal, thankfully, but I have now experienced what it's like to have a root canal because I have been glued to my television set. I agreed to do some commentary responses for the New York Times. So I have had to watch every single minute of the Republican convention, and it's been torture.
Yeah,
it's torture.
I feel your pain. I'm right there with you, believe me.
But yes, what is so amazing to me is that they're out there telling you that this is what's going to happen if Joe Biden is elected in January. Excuse me, who's the president right now? This is happening now.
I know, but Linda, wait, let me just interrupt right there because look, there's that. Look, it's completely ridiculous to accuse him of making people unsafe. On the other hand, the argument that they're making, which isn't completely crazy and may have some traction, frankly, is that Democrats are too wary of alienating their left wing, and they don't ever want to call a riot. And they have, like, certainly the governor of Wisconsin, who's a Democrat, was much too tentative about calling in the National Guard and restoring order.
Absolutely. And I've said this privately on some group exchanges I'm on. Would that, Keisha Lance Bottoms, the mayor of Atlanta, were out there speaking for the Democrats right now. She was great when there were riots in Atlanta. And we do need to hear more from the African American community, from Democrats, from civil leaders around the country and in our cities, calling what's going on, what it is. I mean, when buildings are being destroyed, when there's arson, when people are basically out of control and they're looting and they're destroying things, that's a riot. That's not a protest. And we should not, veer away from that. And frankly, the people who are leading the protests, I don't want them to become vigilantes like on the right, but I do want them to do some self-policing and to be out there speaking very clearly to the people they've gathered together in the streets to say, we're not going to tolerate this. We will not have people doing things that are criminal in our name and supporting our position. So I am like you. I'm very worried that, as ridiculous as it is, that it could, in fact, certainly will drive more people to vote for Trump. And I'm worried that it might actually tip the election if things keep getting worse.
So, Bill, Sarah Longwell did some more of her focus groups, and along with her focus groups, she was also citing data from Pew, showing that while there was a tremendous spike in sympathy for the Black Lives Matter movement right after George Floyd's killing, it has zipped back down to where it was before his killing in the months that have intervened, because people are really worried about the violence, and they perceive, and not incorrectly, in my opinion, that when people are burning and looting, that is not an expression of righteous anger. That is opportunistic criminality. And people draw a very clear distinction between protest and criminality. Are Democrats aware of the danger that this poses to them?
Joe Biden clearly is.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
referred to a statement that he issued that I was going to cite. I read it very carefully a number of times, and I'm not sure I could have improved it in
Yeah.
any
I thought it
respect.
was pitch perfect.
And
Agreed. Yeah.
the question is, will that be seen as an authentic response by him on behalf of the entire Democratic Party, or will it be seen as just a verbal gesture and a
Mhm.
meaningless one given the broader tide of events? Uh, if I were advising the Biden campaign, which I am not, uh, I would I would tell them what I hope they already know, namely that in mass politics, repetition is the mother of persuasion, and doing it
Yeah.
once is not doing it.
Yeah.
So we shall see how seriously they take this. But uh, if it is a potentially momentum shifting issue, which it could be, and I think I may have underestimated its force because I am old enough to remember when terrible destructive riots were truly nationwide and not just in a handful of cities. But it is very easy if you have one example to try to persuade people that that example is somehow symbolic of a larger reality, even when it isn't. Uh,
Well, I
so,
have to say there are quite a few cities that are that have experienced, a significant violence and rioting in the last several months. I mean, you have
by by the
uh,
standards of 1968
no,
or
no, it's
the
not.
mid 1960s, that's my baseline.
Hmm. Hmm.
When every city had something real to worry about based on its experience or the experience of a neighboring city. That just isn't the situation now, but it is very easy in this age of instant news, instant video, instant everything to blow up a handful of examples, and I think that's a fair characterization, into a representation of the totality.
And Damon, on Facebook and other social media, people are getting a loop of these violent images, day after day after day, so that can exaggerate people's sense of how widespread it really is. But I wanted to just get your comments about the very nature of this Republican convention, because on the one hand, uh, it is attempting to portray, as we said, the Democrats as the party of what did they hear? This was Donald Trump Jr. He said, this election is shaping up to be church, work, and school versus rioting, looting, and vandalism. Typically subtle for the Trump family, but really, there's something else that happened before the convention got rolling that is just flabbergasting, and that is that the Republican National Committee put out a statement saying that they were not going to have a party platform. That they were simply going to re-up the 2016 party platform. And in this statement, which really is a summation, in my judgment, about where the Republican Party, what it has become, um, they do two things. They go after the media, and they say, resolved, that the Republican Party has and will continue to enthusiastically support the president's America First agenda. Um, it,
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it was also the case that the DNC did not talk very much about policy. And I think what you're seeing in this election more than I've ever noticed it before is that What you get instead are just dueling, hermetically sealed worldviews.
Yeah.
And there are differences between the worldviews that I think explain a lot about the potency of the Republicans and the challenges faced by the Democrats. The Democrats are telling a complicated both and story, if you know that phrase, both and. So, and you even heard it in Biden's, I thought, also very good statement yesterday about the rioting in response to the Kenosha shooting, where the Democrat repeatedly has to say, yes, there is injustice. Yes, America has failed, but also, and there's a better future ahead. So
Mm-hmm.
it was bad. We fail even in the present, but in the future, it will get better because we have these good principles and we're always in this progressive movement in history toward getting ever better. And for a lot of people on the center left and left, that is kind of in their veins that like, yeah, that's the story of America. You look in the past and it's somehow shameful because of slavery and what happened to the Native Americans and then all of the other groups who've been included in American democracy that were once excluded. And so the future will be better than the present and the present is better than the past. The Republicans have, by this point, developed, I do think the Republicans used to tell a story somewhat like that in their own way, but it has become something very different, and you've heard it at this convention over and over. And I think we'll maybe get to more detail about Vice President Pence's speech, which I thought was sinisterly very powerful yesterday. You hear a story that's either or, not both and. It's the country was born great. It has always been great unless it is under assault by enemies, foreign and domestic, or foreign or domestic. So that can either be communists or it can be like the Chinese Communist Party or Iran. Abroad or at home, it can be these diabolical socialist, Marxist, woke crusaders who were going to destroy the country. And so you have this story that Pence told last night where, again, born great, always great until it was torn down by these other forces. And then Trump came in and he made us great again. And then the Chinese virus came in and we've had this dip, but we need to vote for him again. And once again, we will make America great again, he said at the end. So it's either or, black or white, or light or dark. And it's very Manichaean. And those are the two stories. And the policies, whatever, some Republicans want to have big government, some want small government, some want America to be tough around the world, others want us to withdraw. Yeah, the great leader will figure that out. What matters is that we affirm the right story. And that, at least, is what I'm hearing between last week and this week between the two parties.
Linda, forgive me for being a little bit cynical about these fear-mongering speeches about socialism, but this administration presided over the largest deficits in history during an economic expansion. I used to think that one of the differences between Democrats and Republicans was that Republicans at least paid lip service to the idea of fiscal responsibility. That's gone.
So is the devotion to liberty, including free markets. That's gone as well.
That's gone.
We've got to have trade policies that try to punish certain people, and not just our enemies, by the way, also our friends.
Yeah.
Look, there is no principle there, and that is one of the tragedies of Trump's takeover of the Republican Party. And what is going to be very interesting to see is if he is not, in fact, elected, whether or not out of the embers there can be a coalescence around some of the principles that once defined conservatism. And I'm not sure that there will be. I mean, this has all become, I think, as Damon didn't use the phrase, but I think it's all become a culture war. And this is all about culture. And if you look through, the themes of the convention, I mean, it's us against them. it's my country, right or wrong. It's love it or leave it. And there is no room for civil debate, for differences in trying to approach how it is, that we share common goals. We may differ about how it is we achieve those goals. And that's been, what I've always believed, is that I don't think that people who are progressives and disagree with me on a whole variety of issues are bad people, that they don't want some of the same things I want.
Or that they hate America.
Or that they hate America, right? I think that we have different ways of approaching how to achieve what we want to achieve, but that basically people who get involved in politics in a democracy are people who love freedom, who love our country. And I just want to believe that there is goodwill on both sides, but that is not the view of Trump's Republican Party. And it was on full display this week. And I guess one of the things that was so cynical to me, and I don't know if you were going to bring this up or not, but the appeals to women in blacks that took place.
I was just going to turn to you about that. Yeah.
Yeah, because, I'm sorry. The number of Black and female speakers was overwhelming.
Yeah.
And they tried to convince us, despite our lying eyes and ears, that Donald Trump was no racist, that in fact he was, the ultimate uber feminist, that he empowered women, and that he loves Black people, and that
he's sensitive and compassionate.
And he's sensitive and compassionate, yeah. And then, I looked at that naturalization ceremony that took place, and I thought to myself, aren't those people from those S-hole countries that he referred to? I didn't see any, what was it, Norwegians there being sworn in. So, it's so cynical. It's so hateful.
It's also so transparent, you would think.
Well, I would hope so. But, look, he's not going to get, a huge portion of the Black vote. He's going to lose the female vote. He just wants to eke out enough suburban female voters to be able to assure that he wins in those battleground states. And he thinks if he parades a lot of women and a lot of Blacks in front of them, they're going to think he's an okay guy. And when people talk about him being, a loudmouth and not being able to control his Twitter feed, but really in private, he's a really nice guy, and he gives you a call after you've had a double mastectomy in the hospital. And, he does all these nice, kind things to people that we're going to buy it.
Damon, I want to hear more from you about this Pence address, because I found it beyond disgusting. There were so many lies and misrepresentations of various kinds in it. But what did you say? You said it was diabolically something?
Yeah, it was diabolically powerful and effective. I agree with you that it was. I mean, some passages of it were almost like bullet pointed lies. Like the whole bit about Trump's response to the coronavirus was just an alternative reality take on what really happened. And it's the things that he said about Biden's record. There were long passages in it that were just simply made up nonsense. And so if you're grading it kind of from outside the Republican bubble, it was appalling. And I agree that it was appalling. But by the same token, kind of as someone who comes out of a bit of a speechwriting background and I study presidential rhetoric, it was, I think, incredibly effective at doing what I was talking about a moment ago, at painting a closed worldview that is utterly different than the narrative that you hear and that is sort of presumed in the mainstream media, among liberals, progressives, Democrats, however you want to put it, people who are not diehard Republicans. And so, and I was kind of slack-jawed listening to it. First of all, Pence is an extremely gifted speaker. He came out of a radio background, and he speaks extremely well. He's very good with the dramatic pause. I think only Obama is as good as he is at delivering a speech. I think Obama's speech last week was brilliant. And Pence's was kind of like the kind of kind of the dark, evil version of Obama's speech, because it too presented this like monumental choice, this monumental decision facing the American people. But
Can I interrupt for one
yeah,
quick
sure,
second?
yeah.
Here's a quote. Quoth the vice president: "The choice in this election is whether America remains America."
Exactly. Well, Ron Brownstein has a good piece in the Atlantic today where he frames the whole analysis of the convention using the Michael Anton Flight 93 essay to say that the rhetoric of that essay, where everything is at stake, everything is on the line, we have to charge the cockpit and risk crashing the plane because if we don't, we know we're doomed, has now totally shaped the way that Republicans think about every election. And Pence's evocation of that was the most kind of fully developed and fleshed out I've heard in a real political speech. So that's what I'm commenting on, that I was sort of amazed to think, like, my goodness, if the Republican Party really, like, if this is how they and kind of Republican leading independents really start looking at the world as a whole, this is not going to be good. I will add as a quick addendum that it is also true that Obama's speech was kind of like the Flight 39 election. Now, I tend to lean in the direction of Obama's interpretation of this. In fact, I made my wife and daughter watch the speech with me on the weekend because I thought it was such a great speech, and we all sort of agree with the gravity facing us. But note how both parties are going into this as if I have to win or America is doomed.
Yep.
And
it's Armageddon.
It's a little troubling when rhetoric ratchets up to quite that level.
And especially when you have people shooting one another in the streets as the background noise of this. It's very worrying. I just have to just throw in a couple of fact checks. I mean, one of the things that Pence said was that Biden is for open borders. Not true. He also said, in fact, he fought with the other Democrats during the primary about that very matter. He also said that he favors defunding the police. Again, false. Well, and he said one more thing, which was highly misleading. It wasn't an outright lie, but it might as well be. He said that the security guard, Dave Patrick Underwood, the black security guard who he said was killed, quote, during riots in Oakland, unquote. Well, he was, but the chief suspect is a member of the Boogaloo Boys or whatever they call themselves, which is a right-wing extremist group. So that's a little bit of sleight of hand there. So, Bill, one of the things that I thought I was going to, when I heard that the McCloskeys, the gun-toting Italianate mansion dwellers from St. Louis, who became internet sensations a couple weeks ago, that they were going to be speaking, I thought, oh my goodness, that's going to be a complete catastrophe. And I happen to think that they are dangerous fools for the way they wave their guns at people and with their fingers on the triggers. But at the same time, I have to say, sort of like Damon evaluating the Mike Pence speech, this little appeal that they did about, we were just minding our own business and an angry mob descended on our home and we're just protecting our home. That's going to resonate with a lot of people.
This may be wishful thinking, but I note with interest that the audience for the Republican convention is or has been, at least on the first night, it was smaller than for the first night of the Democratic convention. I think it's probably evened up a little. Who is watching? My sense is that viewership on both sides has imploded towards the people who are already committed to their respective parties. How much persuasion is actually going on? How many minds are being changed? How many votes are being shifted? I'm not sure that the answer to that is a lot. Uh, it's very early in the game, and no doubt both sides will be slicing and dicing their convention and using it to best advantage wherever they think it will be effective. But the reaction from the Democratic convention indicates that it essentially left the race unchanged. It's possible that the reaction from the Republican convention will show a shift of some sort. In which direction, I won't venture to predict. Uh, and I have no idea whether the suburbs will say, "Oh my goodness, the barbarians are coming. We'd better vote for Trump," or whether there will be a backlash against the over-the-top rhetoric that many speakers employed. I just don't know. And I don't think anybody knows at this point.
You
And
you
I
you
have
did.
I have argued repeatedly. I've made myself completely clear on this point so that if I'm wrong, I will be completely wrong. Uh, that is, and unmistakably and undeniably wrong, and that is, it is not 1968 anymore.
Mhm.
And that white America is not where white America was in 1968. We have changed. We haven't changed as much as we thought we had or hoped we had, but we have changed. Uh, White America is much more educated than it was back then. Trump's base is a lot smaller. It's only half the size as a share of the electorate that it was back then. Uh, and I am not sure how much of a difference this is going to make with the 5 to 7% of the electorate that is persuadable.
Damon, did you want to add something?
Yeah, just a little tiny bit of data on some of this. Our friend Sarah Longwell, whom you brought up earlier, was tweeting also about some focus groups that she's held in the last couple of weeks. And she said that in 2 cities where she's met with, I think she usually meets with like Republican women who voted for Trump but aren't happy with him and might be persuaded to vote for Biden. Of all the people at 2 focus groups she's done in the last couple of weeks, only one person has been watching the convention.
Yeah.
And then also this morning, or I guess around noon, right before we started taping, overnight ratings were released for night 3 of the convention. Republican had viewership of 10.5 million people.
That's terrible.
The third night of the Democrats was 16.2 million. Pence's speech was watched by 54% fewer people than Harris's. So that sounds atrocious. Like we're all watching this for our sins, but you wonder how many other people actually are. However, let me throw in another curveball for you. You may have seen another little note from the week is that there have been these roving bands of Black Lives Matter protesters, usually entirely white, walking through cities and kind of barging into restaurants and kind of coming around people and demanding that they hold up their fist in solidarity with the movement.
Mm-hmm.
And there was this viral video of a bunch of people doing that at a Washington, D.C. restaurant. And that video has been viewed as of this morning by 12.5, well, it's had 12.5 million views, which means that 2 million more people in the last 48 hours have viewed that video than watched the convention last night. So that just shows like it's hard to anticipate exactly how all of this is going to play out because the actual convention, which you would think would be the main driver of public opinion, maybe that's dying and is going to have very little impact. But a single viral video that makes a lot of suburban people go, oh, crap, I sure hope the next time I'm out to dinner, these thugs don't come in and intimidate me and threaten to beat me up for not raising my fist. It's hard to know.
Yeah, I have to tell you, when I saw that video, the first thing I thought of was, This couldn't have been scripted better if it was done by the Trump for President committee, right? A bunch of Black Lives Matter thugs threatening a poor lady who actually had marched with Black Lives Matter and was just sitting there trying to enjoy her meal and was being harassed by this huge gang. And I thought, in fact, I'm wondering if Roger Stone isn't behind this somewhere.
Yeah, although if Roger Stone had done it, the protesters would have been from Black Voices for Trump, because that would have been even more incendiary.
Yeah.
So here's my question. What were the diners doing inside at a restaurant?
No, they were outside. They were outside.
Okay, fair enough.
But Linda, did you have one other thing on this?
Well, a couple of things. I mean, one is I think what we're hearing from Damon is scary, because I think that social media and YouTube and all of the hits that you're going to see on Twitter and other places are driving the discussion more than people sitting down and doing what we've done, even though we've been hostage to do it, which is actually listening to the whole thing. And that's, that is unfortunate. The other thing, though, I was going to say was about Bill Galston saying this is not 1968 in terms of, the electorate. You're darn right it's not, in part because the white population that Richard Nixon was able to appeal to was an overwhelming white majority. And we are no longer an overwhelming white majority, particularly if you count non-Hispanic whites, because many Hispanics rather consider themselves white. But if you take only the non-Hispanic white population, it has diminished significantly. So it is a different America. I do think that these cultural appeals can have power. We're not going to know. I mean, it's really going to be externalities that determine this election. I mean, it is going
it could be.
Yeah, I really
a big storm. Remember what Hurricane Sandy did in 2012? I mean,
and Katrina.
Katrina
turned everybody against George W. Bush. I mean, I just think that we just don't know what is going to happen between now and the election. It's not controllable. We don't really have any control at all over it. And we just say our prayers.
Yeah, exactly. Since you guys who've all been roped into sitting there and watching this thing, just like me, you'll appreciate this, that when, that scene where Trump interviewed a bunch of people that had been held hostage in various countries and he was talking with them. Well, I really identified with those folks. That's how I felt being forced to watch this thing.
And he told the guy who had been held in Turkey that Erdogan's a good guy.
Erdogan was great. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. His jailer. Okay. Well, let us now turn to our final thoughts. Bill Galston.
Yeah. I believe it was Damon who already invoked the name of one of my favorite political reporters, Ron Brownstein, who writes not one but 2 columns a week. The other one is for CNN. I commend it to everybody's attention because it is a long, data-rich evaluation of the prospects of the Republican Party in the long term if it continues along its present demographic course. And the results are not encouraging for people who would like to see the Republican Party as a co-equal competitor to the Democrats in, let us say, the year 2028.
Linda.
Well, I want to point to a story that was in the LA Times, and I actually saw it on television as well, which focused on the LA Clippers coach, Doc Rivers. He said something which just really affected me. He said, "It's amazing why we keep loving this country and this country does not love us back." And of course, Doc Rivers, for those who don't know, is Black. And he was talking about his reaction to what was going on in Kenosha, Wisconsin. And I think it's important for all of us to listen to that, because I do think that too many conservatives in particular have absolutely no idea what it is like to be Black in America. And no, we're not an irretrievably racist country, but there is enough racism that goes on that I think we have to recognize it, and I think we have to be a little more empathetic.
With every passing day, I regret more and more the way too early death of my old friend and mentor, Jack Kemp, for whom I had the pleasure of working back in the late 80s on his ill-fated presidential race. He was one of the most big-hearted and generous political forces in America. He was very concerned about improving the lives of African Americans, and that made him stand out in the Republican Party. Damon.
Well, my suggestion is, and this is very me, a tweet thread that thankfully, for those of you who do not live on Twitter as I do, good for you, by the way, there's something called a thread reader, which turns a tweet thread into actually something like an essay. And this one reads like a good short essay. The author is Julian Sanchez, who's is a kind of libertarian, very smart reporter. He knows a lot about law. His Twitter handle is @normative, but if you just look him up under Julian Sanchez, you'll find him. It's a very good short thing, takes about 5 minutes to read. He apparently injected the phrase epistemic closure into the conversation years ago. And he's revisiting the idea to clarify that the idea does not and was not intended to mean an echo chamber. It doesn't mean siloing and only listening to people within your own kind of ecosystem. It's a deeper idea that it allows you not to not hear objections to your own view, but to explain to yourself why you don't have to listen to them or take them seriously as objections. And he walks through how the Republicans over the last 4 years under Trump have developed a series of concepts that serve that function. For instance, deep state. Anytime someone raises an objection to Trump, if you can just say, "Oh, that's just an example of the deep state," then you just automatically dismiss the objection. Similar with fake news, similar with the swamp. That these like little tropes that we get so sick of hearing Trump saying over and over again, and that the whole Republican ecosystem now parrots all the time, actually serve a kind of cognitive function of insulating the right from criticism. And so it's a very thoughtful and, as usual, troubling exploration of exactly what's going on the right to allow the things to happen that are happening.
That's interesting, and I will look that up. I would just add, there's one other which I addressed in a piece today that I think is along the same lines, which is there are many Republicans and conservatives who use the matter of abortion law as a way of sort of shutting down their moral judgment on everything. If somebody is correct on abortion, then their brains snap shut and they don't reflect on, how that fits into a larger context of morality on other issues. And I think that's a weakness.
Absolutely.
Okay, mine is praise for the American Civil Liberties Union, which is unusual for me. I found them to be somewhat biased and one-sided in recent years, whereas they have a proud tradition of upholding civil liberties in America, but they don't always live up to their own standards. But today they did. A piece in the Wall Street Journal by David Cole, who is the legal director of the ACLU. His article is called "The NRA Has a Right to Exist," and he's critical of the New York Attorney General for bringing an action against the NRA. Now, the NRA is very corrupt. Leadership of the NRA, deeply corrupt. There's been a lot of self-dealing, and the board has to deal with that, and there should be criminal liability where required. And he doesn't deny any of that, but he says the attorney general has gone too far. He's overreached, and she's trying to shut down the entire organization. And he points out that, if government can just shut down organizations that it doesn't like because of the views they express, the NRA is a big lobbyer for gun rights, and that's part of the Constitution, and people may not like it, but using this scandal as an excuse to try to shut them down really does violate people's rights, both of association and of free speech. And so bravo to the ACLU for doing its traditional role. Okay, thank you one and all.